Halingam, and today we are going to talk about how to manage difficult conversations. Difficult conversations, whether it is about telling a client that the project is delayed or it is about presiding over an unenthusiastic performance review, these are an inevitable part of management. So, how do you go about preparing for this kind of a discussion? How do you find the right words to say at the right moment? And how can you manage the conversation so that it goes as smoothly as possible? Now, I'm sure we've all had experiences with these kind of conversations in the past. It could be, an instance where your boss lashed out at you during a heated discussion, or um, a subordinate started to cry during a performance review, or a customer hung up the phone on you. Admittedly, these are very difficult conversations, and we tend to avoid them because of that. But that's not the right answer. So, as much as we would like to avoid them, they are an essential part of being part of a management team. And the main thing is to learn how to handle them in a way that will produce a better outcome, kind of a win win situation for both the people. Now, there are a few points to keep in mind when we talk about managing difficult conversations. Let me go through them one by one. The first one is to change your mindset. So, the minute you get into a conversation or you gear up for a conversation, which mentally you've labeled that this is going to be a difficult conversation, so you tend to be more nervous, apprehensive, upset about it, and that will have an impact on the overall conversation and the result. Instead, try to put yourself in a positive frame of mind and try to think of ways to have a constructive conversation, even though it's a difficult conversation. Often it's all in the mindset, and the minute you get into a conversation thinking that it's a normal conversation, even a difficult conversation will go positive. So, the first point is change your mindset. Second, breathe. As cliched as it may sound to say, breathe, but I have found that in difficult, stressful situations, often just taking a nice deep breath actually calms you down. And it needs to be really mindful breathing. And this overall calms you down, calms your nerves, helps you to focus or refocus whatever is required. And um, it also gives you the capacity to face this conversation. Now, let's say a colleague comes up to you saying uh, that he or she has some issue which you realize could lead to a hard conversation or a difficult conversation. So, if you want to prepare yourself for it before getting into the discussion, you could excuse yourself from your colleague and say, let me go get myself a cup of coffee, or take a washroom break. This will give you time to reflect on the issue that has been disclosed to you by your colleague, and also organize your thoughts. Next. So, the second point that we saw was breathe. Next is, whenever you know it is going to be a difficult conversation, it is important that you plan ahead for it, but at the same time, you should not sound robotic or scripted. So, you could prepare or plan for the conversation by jotting down a few points. uh, I will not suggest drafting an entire script because that will make you sound robotic or scripted. And it could very well happen that you plan for the conversation to go in a particular way, and so you have planned uh, an entire script. What will you do if you get into the conversation and it goes on an entirely different track? So then you will be flummoxed as to, my script is not going to work, so what am I going to do now? So instead, if you just have some key bullet points which you have noted down, no matter which track the conversation goes, you will still have the points to build up on because the topic is something you know what it is going to be all about. So there needs to be an amount of flexibility that you should maintain, uh, or let's say a repertoire of possible solutions or alternatives that you can give the other person. And try and keep your language as simple, clear, and direct as possible. At the same time, trying to be as neutral as well. All right, so that was the third point, which is to plan ahead of time but not sound scripted. Next is understanding the other person's point of view or perspective. Whenever you know it is going to be a difficult conversation, the more fluid, the more flexible you are, the better an outcome that you will get from that conversation. You can't really get into a conversation like that with a mindset saying, oh, it's my way or the highway. That attitude will never help you. Instead, what you need to do is to understand or ask yourself, what is the actual issue, and according to the other person, what does he or she think is the issue? Now, of course, it could also be that you are not sure about what the other person's thought process is, in which case it's very important that you acknowledge honestly that, hey, I don't know what your thought process is. uh, why don't you share it with me? That will help me understand your perspective, and maybe we can arrive at a win-win solution which works for both of us. All right, now, once you get the point of view from the other person, you can look at areas which overlap between your point of view and the other person's point of view, and that gives you a common ground to think of a possible solution to the issue. Next, it is very, very, very important to be understanding, to be compassionate. We all are human beings at the end of the day. And we're talking about difficult conversations. So they can be painful. They could be about sensitive topics which are difficult for the other person to listen to. So it is very important that you look at it the from a place of empathy, and you understand that, okay, this is difficult, this is painful for the other person, and try and reflect that understanding, that empathy in your words, in your demeanor, in your attitude. You don't really need to say, "Oh, I'm so sorry," and it need not necessarily be conveyed in words, because sometimes that could backfire as well. The other person could feel that you are sympathizing or pitying him or her, which definitely is not something that the other person would want to hear. So try and be as understanding and compassionate as possible. Next, it is very, very, very important, not just for difficult conversations, but overall for anything, any area of life, listening. Active listening with an understanding is very, very important. So, again, like we said earlier, when we were talking about one of the other points, that you should not get into it with a my way or the highway kind of an attitude. Similarly, you need to have patience to listen, to understand, and then find the right words so that you can calm down the other person in case the other person is upset or angry. Because the minute both people are calm and collected, uh, the chances of the conversation going more smoothly, and both people being in the right frame of mind to listen to each other and to arrive at a possible solution, is a higher possibility when both people are in a very calm frame of mind. So, and when I say listen, it's not that you just listen. What is also important is that the other person should feel that you're listening. So let's say I pick up my phone and I'm fiddling with my phone, and I keep saying, okay, yeah, yeah, I'm listening. That doesn't really reflect a listening attitude, right? So, listening. Next, um, what is also important is that you go into any difficult conversation with the mindset that you could be getting some points that you would need to reflect on. You would need, or it's possible that you could have some takeaways or learnings from this conversation. So it's very important to ask yourself, is there anything that I can give back to this conversation? um, for example, let's say uh, we are currently living in quite a bad economic situation globally, and consequently there are a lot of layoffs happening in the market. So let's say you have to convey the news to someone that you've worked with for a really long time, that he or she is being laid off. So what is it that you could give back in this situation, or how can you lend a helping hand in this situation? So You could offer to write a really strong recommendation for your colleague who you've worked with for such a long time. Um, this would obviously help the other person in their job search, which they would have to start soon. And it's important that any suggestion or anything that you suggest giving back needs to be something constructive, needs to be something which will be of true value to the other person. And this will also help the other person respect you more, understand you more. All right. Finally, let's talk about some do's and don'ts, so to say, to remember when we talk about managing difficult conversations. So, it's always nice to take regular breaks during a work day, but especially when you know it's going to be a particularly difficult day and you have one or more difficult conversations coming up during the day. Taking frequent breaks or regular breaks during the day will keep you calm and composed and centered, and you will be better equipped to handle difficult conversations. Secondly, slow down the pace of the conversation that you are having. Whenever you tend to speak very fast, your next thought has not yet formulated, and so you tend to fumble to find the right words to say next. Instead, if you have a slow pace of conversation right from the beginning, it gives your thoughts and your speech to match each other, and also it gives the other person a gap to say something or to interrupt in between if they have something to offer. Also, it shows the other person that you are listening. And third thing in do's is try to be as constructive as possible during what is admittedly a difficult conversation. Now, let's look at the don'ts. So, the first very important don't is to not get into the conversation with the mindset that it is going to be a difficult conversation. Instead, if you view that conversation in a positive or a neutral conversation, or you think of it as such, that will help you tackle the conversation better. Second, don't is like we discussed earlier, do not write down an entire script. Rather, be as open and flexible in approaching the conversation as possible. And finally, it is very important that you listen, understand, and try to incorporate the other person's point of view as much as possible, which will help you in arriving at the correct solution that is required. So, this was a brief uh, conversation, or let's say a brief discussion about how to manage difficult conversations. Hope this really helps you. Thank you so much.